Kia ora, g'day, welcome back once again here with part 4, episode 4, and my reaction to the Tucker Carlson Network 9/11 files from cover-up to conspiracy. So let's jump back in.
If you wanted conspiracy theories to flourish after the 9/11 attacks, here's what you'd do. You'd suppress video evidence of the attacks themselves. You'd ship the rubble from the attacks overseas immediately without looking at it. You'd call everyone who disputed the official narrative crazy or a criminal. You'd engage in a campaign of very obvious lies about the attacks. You'd do everything you could to prevent an actual investigation into what happened. You'd avoid any public trials. And when you captured and killed the perpetrator, you'd show no photos or video evidence of the raid that killed him, and then you'd dump his body into the middle of the ocean. Then you'd use the attack to justify the invasion of a completely unrelated country on behalf of a foreign power. In other words, you do exactly what the U.S. government did in the wake of 9/11. It's possible that there are people who wanted conspiracy theories to thrive. The more far out, the better. The more time people spend wondering about directed energy weapons, the less time they focus on the obvious, the facts hiding in plain sight.
I've heard bits and pieces about these directed energy weapons in Antarctica or whatever. I haven't looked right into it. I've heard comments, and I think Sean Ryan has had a person on his show spoken about apparently America, through the use of these types of weapons, accidentally caused the Christchurch earthquakes and the disaster that happened down there. Man, I don't know. I haven't begun to dig into that stuff or watch those interviews yet, but I have got them on my list. I have heard of them. So crazy.
And the main fact that they are ignoring is our government's central role in facilitating those attacks. We established this in episode 1 of this series, and the extreme levels of incompetence that made it possible for bin Laden from Kandahar, Afghanistan, to pull off the most sophisticated terror attacks in history. On the other hand, not all the wildest theories about 9/11 are crazy. Some of them raise legitimate questions about what happened. And in this episode, we'll go through those theories one by one and explain using primary source documents, interviews with CIA officials, contemporary news reports, exactly what we know about those theories. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed at 10:28 a.m. on the morning of 9/11, and when it did, burning debris fell and damaged several of the buildings around it, including a building called World Trade Center Building Number 7. It was a 47-story steel frame high-rise located about a football field's length away on the other side of Vesey Street. Interestingly, there was a building between the North Tower and Building 7. That building,
I think this is the bits and pieces that I've heard about, not in this format. I've just heard, I can't remember how long ago now, talks and theories and speculation around what happened. I thought it was 6 or 7, I think, is a number that I've bantered around, but I've never gone digging or trying to search up more in and around it. So I'm glad that it's included in this series that this guy's doing.
Did not collapse. The collapse of Building 7 is completely unaddressed in the 9/11 Commission report. 577 pages, but no explanation as to why Building 7 fell. And that provoked very obvious questions. People have been talking about it for the last 24 years.
And if you watch some of these pieces, you can actually see them turning to dust before they hit the ground.
A steel building doesn't fall into its own footprint because a plane hit another building a couple hundred yards away.
I did not see a plane. They said the plane hit the first building, the second building just exploded.
The circumstances around Building 7's collapse and the near...
The second building just exploded. That's what she saw. She saw the plane hit. Crazy, man. Oh, I don't know if she's talking about Building 7, actually. Maybe she's talking about still the 2 World Trade Centers.
Total absence of an explanation for why it collapsed provoked, in the end, a Senate investigation.
Start with Building 7. Again, I don't know that you can find structural engineers that would say that that thing didn't come down in any other way than a controlled demolition.
Building 7 had a pretty amazing list of tenants. They included, ironically, the New York City Office of Emergency Management. That would be the
It must have been, I think maybe it was Building 7, must be where I heard the comments about that building, or the building, the way it came down, couldn't have come down in any other way other than a controlled demolition.
Agency responsible for responding to the 9/11 attacks. On the 9th and 10th floors of Building 7 were the New York field office of the United States Secret Service. The equipment and records they kept there were destroyed that day when the building collapsed. The building's 25th floor was home to a secret CIA office. Its records were also destroyed. Across the 25th floor was a Department of Defense office. It's unclear exactly what it was doing there. Building 7 was one of just 3 buildings that collapsed that day. The collapse of the other 2, the Twin Towers, got extensive coverage in the 9/11 report, of course. But Building 7 was almost entirely ignored. It's worth remembering that even on the morning of the 9/11 attacks, there were very prominent people already doubting whether a plane could take down a steel frame building.
I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through this steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane, because you're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on a building. I mean, these buildings were rock solid.
One reason the 9/11 Commission may have effectively ignored the collapse of Tower 7 is because even now we don't really know much about it. On the morning of September 11th, Lower Manhattan was cut off from the public with military-style.
That should throw up more questions just right off the bat. We don't know much about it. This random Building 7 just collapsed, supposedly collapsed all on its own, or due to fire, I think I've heard in some of the comments, or read in some of the comments, as a result of the Twin Towers being hit or taken out. Ridiculous.
Checkpoints. World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed that afternoon at 5:20 p.m. Video that has been widely circulated appears to show it falling symmetrically into its own footprint.
I'm no expert on building demolition or anything like that, but some of the video footage that I've seen in the past of buildings that have been set for a controlled demolition, like they tend to collapse straight up, and all the video footage that I've seen anyway, they fall like that building was just showing there.
Several buildings closer to the Twin Towers, meanwhile, remain standing. That's odd. And then the debris was removed immediately and shipped to Asia. That's even stranger.
Where is all the rubble gone? And have you been able to, is there any way you can answer that question?
I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't get the question.
Okay, I apologize. Jackie Judd and several other people keep asking us, when you look at where the towers used to stand, there is surprisingly so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
It's a very good question, Peter, and I have asked some people who've been doing some of the rescue and recovery work this morning. If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was pulverized, evaporated. Now, I should say, though, for the last several hours, there's been a steady stream of dump trucks and other very large vehicles carrying out debris.
According
Oh man, who got that contract, eh? Who got the contract with the trucks, the dump trucks, or was it military, to come in and start removing the debris the way that it's mentioned or portrayed or stated in this series? That's nuts, man. Without doing the investigations, airplane crash investigations, they're not removing all the debris and shipping it off. I think I heard them say overseas to Asia. Like, all the debris is kept, from what I understand, and it's used as part of the investigation to try to determine what went wrong. What if there's traces of anything that may have contributed to. Oh man, it's just.
to a New York Times article published 5 months after the attacks, quote, an unknown number of steel columns has been sent off to mills as far away as Asia without ever having been examined or saved. This made it nearly impossible for engineers to answer the monumental questions of exactly why and how the buildings, designed to sustain a jet impact, completely collapsed. To the extent that any analysis of the debris was done at all, it was done by volunteers at a scrapyard in Jersey City, New Jersey. According to the New York Times, the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation involves extremely...
You get volunteers at a scrapyard to do the investigation?
thin bits of steel collected from the trade towers and from 7 World Trade Center, a 47-story high-rise that also collapsed for unknown reasons. The steel apparently melted away, but no fire in any of the buildings was believed to be hot enough to melt steel outright. 2 agencies investigated the collapse. One was FEMA, which relied on volunteers, and the other was NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, funded by Congress. FEMA's explanation is that falling debris from the North Tower damaged the outer facade of Building 7 and started a series of fires in the lower floors. According to NIST, the collapse of the towers in the morning had damaged water mains, so the building's sprinkler systems failed. Since the building had been evacuated earlier in the morning and the fire department's resources were stretched to a breaking point by ongoing search and rescue missions, fire chiefs made the decision early on not to fight the fires that were burning in Building 7. According to the NIST report, thermal expansion of steel beams, not the complete melting of steel, caused the connections tying a crucial girder 2001A, to column 79, and that joint failed. The girder walked 6¼ inches off its seat, and that precipitated what is known as a progressive collapse. That means that the collapse started in one area and then spread downward due to gravity through the rest of the building. That's the explanation. There are 2 questions that come to mind, and both are obvious. First, if there was just one failure point, then why does video evidence show the building coming down symmetrically, all at once, at freefall acceleration, in what more closely resembles what's called a global collapse, where all the supporting columns are severed simultaneously? The second question is, how have other steel frame buildings around the world, similar in design to that in Tower 7, fared during fires? In 1991, for example, the 38-story One Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia had an 8-floor fire that burned for 18 hours, and yet the building didn't collapse. In 1988, the 62-story First Interstate Bank building in Los Angeles had a massive fire that started on the 12th floor. There was no structural failure. In 2017, the 24-story Grenfell Tower in London burned for over 24 hours. And yet the internal steel withstood the fire.
Pretty hard to argue with that, eh? And even looking at the symmetrical falling of that building, the way it came down, you can, well, for me, looking at that and hearing this for the first time portrayed in this way, I can understand why questions have been, why questions have been asked about this, and the seeking of information and answers to these questions, because what we're hearing, it doesn't make sense.
So why then did Building 7 collapse after just 7 hours of burning, in a way that no steel frame building anywhere in the world has ever collapsed? With the support of a group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, Professor Leroy Hulsey of the University of Alaska at Fairbanks conducted an independent study whose findings were released in 2020. Professor Hulsey found that office fires of the kind in Building 7 on 9/11 could not have produced sufficient thermal expansion to cause the crucial girder to fail. It's impossible, he found. And more significantly, he and his team found that NIST's explanation does not account for what anyone can see on video, which is that the entire building came down all at once, not in a progressive collapse, but in a total collapse. Something else, therefore, must have triggered the downfall. There's only one thing that could have triggered a collapse like the one we saw on television, and that is a controlled demolition. That was his conclusion. Our ability to...
I wonder where they got all the camera footage from. Was it just people saw what was happening and then they just pulled out their phones and started filming in that area? I assume that's probably what happened, but it's lots of different angles, and kudos to those people for pulling out their phones or whatever device they used to start recording. But it's uncanny how, I suppose, the footage captures the one of the buildings the way it was coming down. I'm assuming that that's that building 7. It's just weird.
To analyze the collapse is limited by the video that we have. We don't have footage of the south side of the building where the fires were, because the cameras there were likely destroyed or obstructed by the collapse of the Twin Towers. One issue with the controlled demolition hypothesis is that the widely circulated video of the building coming down is selectively edited. In fact, the building did not exactly collapse all at once. It came down in 2 stages. What you're seeing now is the full video of the collapse. It shows the penthouse collapsing first, and then very quickly, the rest of the building going. The unedited video leaves more questions than it answers. It calls into question the official NIST narrative, but it doesn't conclusively show a controlled demolition either. Because of how quickly authorities shipped the rubble overseas, we did not get a thorough investigation into the destruction. But one group of scientists did collect and test 4 samples of dust and debris collected by a Manhattan resident about 10 minutes after the collapse of the Second World Trade Center tower, 2 the next day, and a 4th about a week later. In 2009, they published the results of their study in the Open Chemical Physics Journal. In those samples, the scientists found distinctive red-gray chips full of highly energetic and thermitic material. In other words, they found traces of explosive compounds. To its credit, NIST's report did investigate multiple hypothetical blast scenarios, but found it would be impossible to carry out on any floor in the building without detection, and would have required removing or cutting columns with welding torches and placing wires for demolition. NIST found that window breakage patterns on visible floors was not at all like expected from a blast. NIST did not test residue from the attacks for thermite, but did note that thermite burns slowly relative to explosive materials and would require several minutes in contact with a massive steel section to heat it to a temperature that would result in substantial weakening. Additionally, they estimated that at least 0.13 pounds of thermite would be required to heat each pound of steel section to approximately 700 degrees Celsius, the temperature at which steel weakens substantially. Which means that if Building 7 were demolished using thermite, many thousands of pounds of thermite would need to have been placed inconspicuously ahead of time, remotely ignited and somehow held in direct contact with the surface of hundreds of massive structural components to weaken the building, making it an unlikely substance for achieving a controlled demolition. NIST also says that an explosion big enough to take down the building would have been considerably louder than any noises recorded around the time the building collapsed. Yet, eyewitness accounts say they did hear explosions inside the building.
All this time, I'm hearing all types of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions.
We attempted to interview that witness. His name was Barry Jennings, but he died at the untimely age of 53 just 2 days before NIST released its report on Tower 7. The film director...
Wow. Guy died 2 days just before the release of the report. 53, young, saying that he heard explosions. Where was he? What's he doing? Is he inside the building, listening to explosions going off, or what? Or is he outside? I don't know.
Spike Lee attempted to cover this story in an HBO docuseries entitled NYC Epicenters 9/11 to 2021 and a half. In an interview with the New York Times, Lee said the amount of heat that it takes to make steel melt, that temperature is not reached. And then the juxtaposition of the way the Building 7 fell to the ground, when you put it next to other building collapses that were demolitions, it's like you're looking at the same thing. For saying this, Lee was excoriated by the press, which usually lionizes him. He suggested that the official 9/11 narrative might be wrong, and for doing so, he was called an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist by the Times of Israel. In the end, Lee re-edited his docuseries and removed portions that were skeptical of the official story of the collapse of Building 7. Another unusual aspect of Building 7's collapse is that some media outlets reported it happened before it actually happened. Here's footage of the BBC reporting that Tower 7 was down. Keep in mind, this was filmed live 20 minutes before Building 7 actually collapsed.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Salomon Brothers was Building 7's major tenant, and you can see the tower in the background of the shot. Was that just rushed reporting on the day of the attacks? Or did the BBC have advance word that the building was coming down? If the media did have foreknowledge of the events that day,
heard any of this before. It's egg on your face in that one. But I guess the important piece here is, where has that information come from? Solomon Brothers, about that building being down and it's still standing in the background in the camera footage. Holy heck. Sorry, I'll go back a little bit.
Building was coming down. If the media did have foreknowledge of the events that day, they weren't alone. Buried deep in the 9/11 Commission report on page 499, one easily missed footnote says there was a surge in put options, investments that profit when stock prices fall. These put options were put against United Airlines' parent company, and they were placed on September 6th, and then against American Airlines on September 10th. Incredibly, the report goes on to note that 95% of the trade against United Airlines was made by a single U.S.-based institutional investor. So who was that investor? Well,
Holy heck. Hard to argue with that, eh? This is so, as I sit and listen to this for the first time and hear this type of information coming to light, it's heartbreaking, man. Like it's leaves a very angry, I would say, for me, angry and bitter taste in my mouth listening to this. But I can't do anything about it other than smile about this, not because I'm happy, but just at the credit again to those that have been investigating this, but the blatant just disregard, it seems, for human life that these people have looked to profit from and have clearly profited from.
don't know. The U.S. government is still hiding his name. They refuse to tell us. Why? No one will say. The commission report says an investigation by the FBI.
How do you not release the name? How do you not interview, question, interrogate this supposed single owner or 95% of these put options that were put in?
I found out the trades were, quote, innocuous, whatever that means. Researchers have since discovered that these trades are far from innocuous, with trading volumes showing statistical significance, massive statistical significance. There were other trades too. On September 7th, the number of put options placed against British Airways was 4 times the normal volume. The number of put options against American Airlines on the day before the attack was 285 times the normal volume. In the days before the attacks, put options surged against Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch. Both banks had sizable offices in the World Trade Center. There were also notable surges in gold and oil call options in advance of the attacks. But who could have known the attacks were coming, apart from Al-Qaeda? One highly significant yet often overlooked aspect of the 9/11 attacks is that foreign intel agencies, including those of ostensible allies, likely had detailed prior knowledge of the event.
These 9/11 hijackers had come from Germany. Were the Germans asleep at the switch, or did they just not tell us anything about these people?
John Kiriakou was chief of counterintelligence on the bin Laden unit.
I've seen this guy, John Kiriakou, is that how you say his name? Seen him on a few, I haven't watched them, but I've seen that he's been on done a few podcasts. I think he might have even been on the Sean Ryan show.
What about the Israelis? What about the Saudis? There is solid evidence that members of the Saudi royal family were working with Al-Qaeda terrorists.
The 9/11 Commission, not surprisingly, ignored this subject altogether. Here's what we know. As early as January of 2001, France's Foreign Intelligence Service learned that Al-Qaeda was planning a hijacking plot involving a U.S. airline. What did the French tell the United States and when? We don't know. But the French are not alone. Others knew.
Well, there's no doubt that the Israelis and probably the British had better information than the people working against Osama bin Laden in the agency. Much better information.
Michael Scheuer ran the CIA's bin Laden unit in the late 1990s. One reason foreign governments may have had superior information is that the NSA frequently shared signals intelligence details with them, details it withheld from our own CIA. Signals intelligence is a type of espionage that deals with intercepting phone calls and radio communications.
We needed the collection of signals intelligence out of Afghanistan. And since there was no central telephone company or communications companies, it was very limited. You had to be lucky to find the signal. Well, we found a couple of signals, and we shared the information with NSA, and they collected information and wouldn't share it with us in the raw form.
Right. Allies not talking to each other. Internal, I'll use the term superpowers, NSA, CIA, FBI not talking to each other. This is nuts, man. You can't make this stuff up. It seems ridiculous.
NSA reports are generally summaries of what people say over the phone. You don't really know always who's talking to who. The first thing we did when we got the first copies of translated material, we sent them to NSA and said, can you please provide the other half of this to us? And they said, thank you very much, but under the 1947 Act that created NSA, we don't have to share that with anyone, and we're not going to. But somehow the Israelis and the Saudis always were able to find out something was there that they wanted. And so when we refused, they'd call the White House would call the DCI, and the DCI would say, give it to them.
We know very little about NSA's foreknowledge of 9/11 because the 9/11 Commission barely investigated it. Keep in mind, the NSA is the largest American intel agency by far. And yet the Commission never assigned a staff member to research NSA files, in part because some of the 9/11 commissioners and staff simply did not understand what the NSA was and what it did. Even now, the NSA's terrorism archives still have never been thoroughly reviewed by outside investigators. If someone ever did go through those files, they'd likely find a treasure trove of previously undisclosed warnings about the 9/11 attacks. The NSA was the primary agency responsible for monitoring the switchboard through which al-Qaeda operatives communicated with each other.
It's certainly an absurdity for what the American people pay for signals intelligence to be collected, translated, and supplied to the intelligence community, to have the British, the Saudis, the Israelis getting information from our national security agency that we in the agency were not privileged enough to get.
A number of foreign governments may have had foreknowledge of 9/11, but the Israeli government stands out in particular. And here's why. On the morning of 9/11, a group of 5 Israeli nationals purported to have witnessed the initial explosion of the World Trade Center and were seen to be celebrating the event. At the time, the celebrations received quite a bit of mainstream media coverage.
Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th.
It's striking to see operatives from a supposedly allied country celebrating the mass murder of Americans. But it is true that some in Israel saw the attack as a good thing for them. A September 12, 2001 article in the New York Times quotes now Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responding to the 9/11 attacks. Quote, "It is very good," before adding, well, not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy. Netanyahu predicted that the attack would strengthen the bond between our two peoples because we've experienced terror over so many decades, but the United States has now experienced a massive hemorrhaging of terror. According to FBI documents, the Israelis caught celebrating the 9/11 attacks had videotaped the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and may have possessed foreknowledge of the same. When the Israelis were arrested in New Jersey, they were carrying box cutters, multiple passports, thousands of dollars in cash, and photos of themselves smiling with the World Trade Center burning in the background.
The Israelis are always for the Israelis first, last, always. They don't like the United States, except for the most part, our money. And yet, our National Security Agency is producing information for them, but not shareable with its own people.
Probably got moles. They're probably Israelis running the NSA. Far out, man.
Go figure.
According to FBI records, polygraph tests administered by the FBI suggested that they did not have foreknowledge of the attacks, but did engage in deception and were likely involved in illegal foreign counterintelligence. They were spying in the United States. The leader of the group, a man called Dominic Suter, fled to Israel on or around September 14th, 2001, immediately, and he was later included on an FBI anti-terror watch list distributed to European allies in May of 2002. Most of the Israelis were held in FBI detention for 2.5 months before they were deported for visa violations, a common way to expel foreign intel assets from allied countries.
The Israelis pride themselves on having infiltrated every Arab intelligence service, every terrorist group. Did the Israelis know about 9/11 and not tell us?
One memorandum submitted to the 9/11 Commission presented substantial evidence suggesting that numerous art students from Israel, who were in fact Israeli intel assets, had been strategically located across the United States. It's hard not to notice that they lived near the future 9/11 hijackers.
There were groups of Israelis traveling around the country as artists, sketching things. Happened to be one time around Cape Canaveral, I remember, and other places where there were certainly things to paint and sketch, but also noticeably near military installations or some other kind of installation in the government. So I think that's an open question yet.
The so-called Israeli art students centered their operations in Hollywood, Florida, and northern New Jersey. Those are the exact locations of the hijackers before the attack. According to the memorandum, quote, "It is very difficult to believe, based on the existing evidence and the location of their common central operating bases, that this group was not tracking the future hijackers and their collaborators as well." According to The Forward, a Jewish publication, quote, "The Israeli government acknowledged the operation and apologized for not coordinating it with Washington." Within a week of the attack, Israeli intelligence officials claimed they warned the United States about large-scale terror attacks on highly visible targets in the United States. But the specifics of those warnings have never been made public. There's no evidence they happened.
In fact, in the whole time I worked in counterterrorism from 92 till 2004, I never saw one piece of information from the Israelis that was really worth anything.
As Americans, we need Washington to create a new, truly independent commission, one that does not lie, and that instead investigates what happened on 9/11 and answers the questions we've posed in this episode. Who made the decision to ship the debris from the attacks out of this country immediately, and why? What was the role of the CIA officer?
I'll tell you what, it was well planned and coordinated. Whoever organized and did all of this stuff anyway, they thought of clearly a lot of time planning preemptive stuff well before the event took place, from the put options. Who puts in those, if I heard correctly, you're betting on the stocks for that particular company or organization, or in this case, the airlines, going down. Who does that in advance, like a few days or a couple of days before the tragic events that took place? If you're going to do that, clearly you've probably looked at organizing all the debris removal people and how you get rid of that off-site as soon as possible. It's well planned and coordinated anyway. I'll give it that much with regards to the tragedy of what's taken place. It is disgusting as it is when I'm listening to this from a personal perspective. And as I listen to this, I just think, man, I wonder how, and all this stuff would take time. So it's definitely not going to happen. It's a hypothetical. But imagine if this stuff had come out in closer proximity to when the tragic events of 9/11 took place. What impact that might have had on not only the public, but maybe on soldiers that were preparing to deploy. You'd think there might be a case for people potentially, I'm just guessing here, maybe not wanting to go until they got some answers to these questions, till some very, very basic questions were answered and not buried away for privacy or secrecy reasons or whatever. It's just so many holes in this thing. It's unbelievable that this has been allowed to happen. Unbelievable because of my naivety with regards to all the government side of things, but extremely disappointing and sad that you could let 3,000 of your own people die, and then look to also be planning and profiting off that before it happens, and then covering it up.
In Building 7, what signals intelligence did the NSA have in relation to the plot? And how much of it did they share with foreign governments? What did those foreign governments know and fail to tell the United States? The American public deserves answers immediately to those questions. These are all questions the 9/11 Commission itself ignored. Why did the FBI's most wanted poster for Osama bin Laden, updated in November of 2001, omit any mention of the 9/11 attacks? Why did it take the government 5 years to release footage of the Pentagon? And why were there only 2 publicly available videos of the Pentagon crash? The Pentagon was one of the most heavily secured and surveilled buildings on planet Earth. And yet, even now, more than 20 years later, there are only 2 videos. Why did U.S. forces abruptly bury Osama bin Laden at sea and never release any photograph of his body?
These are great questions. Sorry to interrupt in there, but I just think of, who was it? I forget the name of the CEO for the insurance company that was murdered. Not condoning that, but just looking at how quickly and rapidly everything moved to get a result, to catch the individual, and I don't know that person's name either, to bring them in, how quickly all of that stuff moved. I assume the coordination, the information, the use of cameras, getting all this stuff. Like these questions here, only 2 camera angles taken X amount of years before footage was released. One of the most secure and heavily surveilled buildings in the world, and there's bugger all information. It's off, eh? Everything just seems off.
How hard, by the way, would it be for amateur pilots with only basic aviation training and no experience flying jumbo jets to navigate to lower Manhattan and crash into a building? The majority of hijackers were flagged for additional screening at the airport. How did they get on those watch lists? And why didn't security slow them down? Why wasn't there substantial wreckage of Flight 93 at its supposed crash site in Shankville, Pennsylvania? We were told the crash of that aircraft was so powerful that it vaporized the aircraft's hull, and yet the hijackers' passports were found intact at the site. How does...
Oh, far out. It just sounds more and more unbelievable. But this is the first time I'm hearing of this with this particular flight. Like, what about the black boxes? What, did those get vaporized as well? Like that from the rubble. I don't know how the black boxes work. I don't know if there's a tracking device in them that they send out a signal, or that they're constantly sending out a signal. I don't know, so that they can be retrieved in the event of a potential catastrophe. But where are those? So the whole plane vaporizes, except for the terrorists' passports and identifications. Are you serious? That is nuts.
that work? And who was being protected by the Commission's unwillingness to answer these questions? Someone was. None of these questions were even asked by the 9/11 Commission. It's time that someone asked them and that the government answers them. On September 11, 2001, nearly 3,000 people were murdered. In the years that followed, hundreds of thousands more perished as a result of our response to those attacks. The government enacted measures that suspended constitutional protections. The freedoms this country was created to protect, they're gone now. The government employed illegal warfare tactics, including torture and the murder of innocent individuals. Those attacks fundamentally altered the way America operates, the way all of us live here. And yet not everyone suffered in the aftermath of 9/11. Some emerged the winners. We'll reveal who profited from 9/11 in the next installment of our series.
Wow. So maybe they've got some answers to who these people are. Well, clearly they have. So disgusting, man. Heartbreaking to see and listen to this. Extremely disappointing. Just the amount of loss all round. Wow. Massive respect, Tucker Carlson. Thank you for putting this stuff out here for people, for simpletons like me to have a watch and listen and see things through a different lens and perspective. Appreciate the time of anybody that spent any time here on my channel listening to my, not much of a reaction from me. I'm just blown away. A lot of it's just me shaking my head. making faces like, are you serious? So grateful that this stuff is out there and that it's online for people to have a look at and make their own decision. Yeah, I'll leave that there. I'm looking forward to episode 5. I believe that's the last one, or that there were 5 episodes coming out, as far as I know from what I've seen. So I'll look forward to reacting to that one when it's time. In the meantime, the message is the same. Any challenges, difficulties that you may be going through, and just encourage you to keep turning up, keep staying in the fight, put one foot in front of the other, take one day at a time. Know and trust that the sun will shine again, that things can do and will get better if you want them to. As always, go always a little further. Remember, who dares wins and who cares wins. And until the next video, there's a big mana wave coming from me to you, filled with my aroha, respect, appreciation, and gratitude for you all.